All right, I am back with another live stream. Incredibly great guest this week. I imagine he was cringing to hear the kind of little poppy music that was playing as part of the intro, but he's such a gentleman. I'm sure he will overlook my transgression in music. The reason I bring it up is because his latest book, Punk XL, is a continuation of his Punk CX concepts, and we're going to talk about punk and what's punk got to do with it. And he is none other than Adrian Swinscoe, one of the nice guys in the customer experience world. We have a lot of them, really. We're blessed with a lot of colleagues who are incredible. He is one of the wonderful ones, particularly on the other side of the pond in the UK. If you are somebody who needs somebody to guide you along your CX journey, he is certainly that, and a workshop presenter, keynoter, and author. And he's here today. He's on the bus, the CX bus. I got my CX bus driver hat. I never know where to put there it is. There's my CX bus driver hat. We're on the journey. Hey, Adrian, how are you?
I'm very well, Joseph. Quick question. Do I get to drive?
Yeah, well, you absolutely get to drive.
Can I beep the horn?
Yeah, if you speak to my wife, she would recommend that you drive. I'm pretty sure. No, just sight unseen. You've got the nod. All right, let's talk about you. Why not? Since you're here, tell me this journey. How did you find yourself calling yourself customer experience person in life?
Oh, crumbs. So I've always been interested in sort of, customer related stuff, let's say, and I've always I've been involved in sort of either building things or developing things. I've always had like customer value and employee value at their heart. And I did that for the largest kind of time for 4 organizations. And then probably since about 2004, I started working independently, and I did some various kind of things. But then come sort of 2008, around about that sort of time, I decided that I liked working independently, and I wanted to try and see if I could do that sustainably. So I could see where the market was going. And I knew that I'd needed to build a digital footprint in order to do that. And so I started a blog, or started writing about it. And I started writing about general stuff like business development, marketing strategy, that sort of stuff. And I got really, really boring very, very quickly. And I thought, well, crumbs, I have to do something that I'm really into, or I'm really interested in, or something that I kind of care about, or I don't like and I want to change. And I realized that actually I don't like bad service. And it frustrates me how many organizations get in the way of their people delivering good service to their customers. And I've been part of those organizations, and it's always a constant frustration. So I started writing about that. That became my kind of groove. Is I wanted to investigate and understand and explore how we can do things differently to produce those better outcomes. Because ultimately, the thing I'm really interested in is how do we produce organizations that deliver better outcomes for both their customers and their people. And I started that. I started blogging about it. And back in the day, my wife would turn around and go, she would go out and visit friends, and they might ask her, well, where's Adrian? And she'd roll her eyes. She'd be like, oh, he's blogging again. And I was like, oh. But then
what a waste of a life.
I know. But then I wrote a book, like an anthology, self-published anthology back in 2010. And then I started podcasting in 2011 when it was not cool, but now it's cool. And I'm still this is my 11th or 12th year now.
Yeah, I beat you. My first podcast was 2008.
Right.
And we actually could have an audience then without even knowing how to do it, because people, if anybody was interested, there wasn't much out there. But nowadays, it's just such a marketplace of every kind of podcast imaginable. But the audience,
the thing I started doing it because the thing I find really interesting about it, and this is always the thing I've done with my writing, is I've always described it as my public thinking digital notebook. So I'm just really thinking out loud. And the podcast is like an extension of that. I always think my podcast is a bit like my R&D and L&D lab. So you get to talk to amazing people doing very cool things, or they've written stuff, or they've got great ideas, and you get to do that in public. You get to learn in public, but then get to share it at the same time. So I am firmly of the mind that
many have been the time that I've looked back at a blog and I've used it in a book, or I have written about something and I find myself speaking about it on stage some weeks or months later, right? It's interesting how keeping ourselves current or relevant and continually being a student helps us be relevant to other people. So I love that about you. And I did not read your first book. I will be honest. I try to be candid where I can. But can you tell me a little bit about when did you decide to start writing, and a little bit of the value proposition of that book? Because I did read, without a doubt, Punk CX, and I've read and endorsed the current book. So, but the first one is slipped by me. It's on my to read list. But tell us a little bit about the value proposition on that one.
So we've actually done 4. Oh, I've done 4. Yeah. And so the first one I can see behind me is like it's got a black cover. It's called Rare Business, and that was really a bit of a self-published anthology of stuff I'd written. And it was.
Is that on your website?
No, it's not on my website, and it's not really kind of available. And it's because it was did it back in 2010. Anyway, it's a rare artifact. But then the next, if you like, grown-up publishing book was called How to Wow, and that's was done with Pearson. There you go in the on the screen, and that was I learned so much through that process because I worked with a professional editor and had to come up with a proposal and all these sort of things, and that was brilliant. But then on the back of that, I was thinking about kind of doing another one in that sort of style, that sort of black ink on white paper standard business book. And I couldn't quite find a sort of a groove that I wanted to sort of explore. And then I also felt like I didn't really want to kind of write another theory of everything, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
And that's sort of where, because I was a bit like going, I'm feeling slightly frustrated about where things were at. And that's sort of where the story of the Punk CX came from, because the backstory to that was fueled by, I know you'll get this one, Joseph, because you talked about breweries. I was in a pub with a friend of mine, Oisin, drinking Guinness one December evening in 2017, and we were talking about the experience space. And over a few too many pints, I was frustrated about whilst there was so much activity and enthusiasm things, I was just frustrated at the lack of significant improvement. And I just went, I wish somebody would do something a bit more punk. Now, I'm a fan of punk music, so I just sort of understood kind of what that sort of meant. I probably forgot about it afterwards. That's probably a function of too much alcohol.
but you put a stake in the ground that could be recovered someday.
Oh, well, it kind of popped back into my head in the summer of 2018 for some reason. And I started to think about that a bit more. And it struck me there's something to learn from punk music, and also where punk came from. Now, punk, if you know anything about punk music, it sort of exploded out of the back of progressive rock in the 1970s. Now, progressive rock was really popular, and I like some bits of it, but I'm more a fan of punk. And because the things that progressive rock got accused of being was like more interested in itself and its own musicality and virtuosity than it was interested in anything else. It's almost a bit like, how many notes can you play and how many synthesizers can you play at the same sort of time? And then punk was this sort of an anti version of that. It's almost like anybody can do it. You don't need a PhD in music to play kind of like a tune. You can pick up drumsticks or guitar, learn how to play, and just kind of crack it out. And it was all heart and emotion. It was real kind of power, as it were. It's really quite a human sort of like endeavor. And it struck me that the CX space was starting to exhibit some of the same characteristics of prog rock did in the 1970s. It's becoming overly codified, certified, benchmarked, frameworked, all this metric, all these things. And it struck me, okay, well, if that's true, then what would a punk version look like? And so,
I still don't know how. I mean, it would have taken me a lot of Guinness to get anywhere close to that kind of thinking. But I think it's wonderful because you're basically stripping it down, right? And you're getting back to the emotional essence of the thing. And it's a bit contrarian, right? If you put it all together. So tell me, that inspired you to what? Start philosophizing in the context of all of those elements of CX and writing blogs and then booking? Or were you doing speaking on this? I mean, were you helping your clients punk out their CX?
Well, no, this is kind of like, I think it's like the book in itself is like a conversation starter or a fire starter. And look, it's a bit like it's styled not like a regular book. It's styled like an album. It looks like this, and it's very colorful on the inside. And rather than having chapters, it has tracks. And so, like any musical album, there's very few musical albums, I would wager, that most people like from start to finish. And you tend to have 2, 3, maybe 4 tracks that are your favorites, that are the standout ones. You go, oh, that's the one I like, or that's the one I always go back and play again and again and again. It's the same thing with this. This is more of a case of, here's a bunch of ideas that challenge and invite and encourage people to do different things and think differently. In pursuit of those better outcomes I was talking about. And so it's not an answer, it's not a solution, it's more of an invite, but trying to shake the tree a little bit and go, come on, folks, this is important.
Yeah, it is a dialogue. All of your books, the 2 that I've read, now that I know that I'm only read 50% of them, the 2 books that I read are, I think, very different and powerful. Powerful in that I don't read either of these cover to cover, so thank God that I'm not doing it wrong. And I find spots, and I go back and I thumb through it, and it's almost like okay, now I'm going to do the advocate thing, or then I'll thumb through it, and how fast would you drive? Oh, how timely for our theme of being on the CX part. And again, it works for me that way, and it sits on my desk, and it's kind of provocative.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is so there's a guy, Richard Hammond, who is one of the contributors to the new book Punk XL, and he runs a analytics company in the consumer sort of space. And he did a review on Amazon of the of Punk CX, and he said, it's one of those things. He says it's the sort, and he put in brackets, and Adrian will understand what I mean by this. He says it's the sort of book that you would potentially dip into a read when you were sat in the lavatory, contemplating the world, because it's that sort of dip in and dip out. You're not meant to read it from start to finish. You can. There's nothing stopping you, but it's also that sort of thing. It's like it sits there, and it's like giving you a jolt every now and again, or you can have a prod, or you think about different things, and then he talks about giving it to members of his team and say, pick a thing out of that, let's talk about it, let's get in a room and let's talk about it, get in front of a whiteboard and stuff, and then figure it out as a way of trying to solve a problem, to sort of as a catalyst for.
So I haven't really thought of it as a bathroom reader. Okay, I haven't really gotten to that point, but thanks for expanding the options by which I could consume your material. Let me get to what's on your brain, right? Because I think you strip it down, and because you get to the passion of things, and because you're, I think, a little jaundiced to the notion that this kind of antiseptic, programmatic. I mean, to be honest with you, I have colleagues who I love and admire who have sold out their businesses to big corporate entities, and it's like these corporate things that are trying to systematize consulting in the CX space. It feels like corporatization at a level that I'm not really excited about. I think there's an art and passion to this. So what's on the mind and heart of a thoughtful, passionate provocateur?
So let me relay to you a conversation that I had with a friend of mine, lady, yesterday, and we were just talking. I hadn't caught up with her for sometimes I think we hadn't talked in the last 2 years. She's been busy, I've been busy, and we were just generally talking about just work and stuff, and we're talking about sort of CX and things. And I said to her, I says, look, here's the way I think about it. I says, what's the difference between customer experience and the customer's experience? And she looked at me slightly quizzically. And I said, well, technically, only 4 letters and an apostrophe. But in reality, the 4 letters and apostrophe being THE and then apostrophe S. But in reality, the difference between customer experience and the customer's experience can be a country mile. They could almost feel completely on different planets to each other. And for me, that's one of the biggest challenges. You talk about this industrialization of a consulting and sort of CX kind of program, is like going, all of this stuff feels like it's driving a wedge between the connection between the customer and the and the organization. We're actually we're all striving for the same thing, but sometimes we end up kind of this not stopping and just kind of going, what is there something that what could we do that's going to minimize that gap?
So, I know that a lot of rock does not appeal to you, but, the Grateful Dead certainly would just do these endless riffs of stuff that I think was pretty passionate and had a really crazy following. I just felt like you just riffed for like the last minute and a half on a really wonderful concept, right? That simple distinction of perspective of a CX program and a CX, a true person's human experience, and getting inside of that to be able to design from it. Hey, by the way, before we get too much in real people, I just want to thank Salim, who's joined us and said, wow, an honor watching you both. He really means both of you. Let me put you up twice.
Yeah. Big
wow, thank you, Salim, for being there. If you have any questions to pass along to the esteemed Adrian, please feel free to pop those in the chat as well. So that is a distinction, though, right? I mean, the notion that we need to get inside the human experience, not just try to design optimal experiences.
No, that's absolutely right. Now, you've got to get the balance right, obviously, because not all brands or organizations can be all things to all people all of the time. And not everybody, it doesn't make sense for everybody to provide gold-plated, white glove service to all of their customers. If their market and their business model doesn't kind of support that, then you wouldn't want to do it. But I think it's understanding kind of what it is the customer kind of like wants and needs, and then being able to sort of deliver that. I mean, it's like, I talk about in the last kind of year, 18 months or so, that we've seen this kind of massive rise in the demand for more empathy in the interactions that we have with, like the interactions that customers have with organizations, with brands. Now, that's understandable that that's kind of like blown up in this kind of time of weirdness that we're going through, where people are living in dealing with very different things, with a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, a lot of trepidation kind of going on. However, and the pandemic has exacerbated all that. However, those concerns are not new. Customers have been talking about this idea, but they want a more human experience for the longest time. There was global research that was done by Accenture back in 2016, which said the majority of customers around the world, from Japan to Brazil to the US to Europe, kind of all over the place, were saying the thing that we kind of like we're bemoaning. You've got this massive investment in digital stuff, but we're bemoaning. All we're feeling like is that everything's becoming increasingly humanless. And the demand for empathy, or the reflection on a humanless experience, is almost like the manifestations of the same thing. They're just like, we want to connect with people when we want to connect with people. We want stuff that helps us in the moment. Just don't make it hard for us.
Right. And sometimes we want it easy, and sometimes we want to connect with people, but we want both, right? And to the degree that people can help make it easier, all the better. To the degree that people can add that humanity to an easy transaction, all the better. I had the weirdest thing happen, because most of the time when I go in and consult for companies, I'm looking for ways for them to elevate their customer experience. But recently I did have one of those examples that's so in keeping with what you just spoke of earlier. They are not profitable. They are losing money, and they are producing, a Ritz-Carlton level of customer experience. And it's almost, now we're into a whole agile design world where we're trying to figure out, what is your customer wanting? What exceeds their expectation, but doesn't over deliver against it so that you can be around for the next 5 and 10 years to deliver for customers, as opposed to being opulent in the now and gone in the tomorrow. So I haven't seen a lot of that.
Let me give you an example of something that I talked about a while ago. And I asked somebody about it, and they were like going, well, yeah, that just doesn't happen yet. And it was this idea that we see, particularly in financial services, particularly to do with banks, that you've got many, many banks that are trying to push their customers to digital as they pull away from high street or main street stores, because those retail footprints are becoming, the economics of them are becoming increasingly challenging. And I said to the kind of people, that leaves a lot of customers high and dry. There's still customers, particularly aged customers, that still want to deal with the bank. And they don't want to have to travel kind of like so far to kind of have to deal with the bank. And I said to them, I said, I understand the economics of the real estate market and how that's challenging for banks to make that retail branch network make sense. I said, but could we not do something which is akin to the whole banking hall idea, where you have a space where different financial services organizations could almost like have booths, as it were, and you can have a concierge service, and then people can book appointments to see their kind of their retail financial kind of like brand. And then because we have the technology and all the security and everything else that we can put in place to make that make sense and real. And he was like going, I spoke to somebody who was about that, and they said, oh no, that could require them to collaborate and everything else and all that sort of like stuff. And and it just was a bit like, in the moment, it struck me as being supremely selfish and not interested in your customers.
Wow, that's a lovely.
But it's starting to happen now. That's kind of I spoke about that probably about 7 years ago.
Out of necessity, it's happened now. It's not out of the desire to do it because of the right thing to do originally, right? Where your spirit came from. What it really reminds me a lot, we have Lou is saying he's not getting any volume. Patty can check on that in the backstage. I'm getting plenty of volume. I think she's probably listening in to make sure we have Lou. Some platforms, volume's a little bit more challenging. So if you're trying us out on Facebook, and you can pop over to LinkedIn or check your monitor. I don't want Lou to miss us. What I wanted to say, what you reminded me a minute ago, it was you dedicated this book to Tony Hsieh, or I don't know if you call it dedicated. It was a requiem acknowledgement of Tony Hsieh in the book. And, having worked with Tony, and I talked to him probably a month and a half before he died. He had invited me out to his place. It was really, I can't tell you how hard this is, because, I wrote a book about his company, work closely with him. We're just getting some messages that most people are fine with volume. So it just got, just so sad what happened to him. But one of the things that Tony taught me was, if someone can't be served by you, refer them to someone else. And he literally encouraged his contact center, which is called the customer loyalty team. Yeah. He encouraged them, and if we don't have it, to research whether or not shoes.com or whatever the competitor was, if they have it, and if he could, to the degree he could see into their inventory, right, to go ahead and send them over there and let them know and give them the SKU and make it easy for them to get their needs met. Because the next time, they don't go there as their starting point, they come to you as their starting point. And I think that spirit of collegiality, that sense of, it's not about me, it's about the customer. I mean, what wisdom to give the banking industry, whether they were ready for it or not.
Well, sometimes kind of people, as you rightly say, whether they're ready for it, it's like that old saying, it's like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And
speaking of drinking, let's go to the lighter side of this for just a minute. Okay. This is my section of trivia to the guests. Now, the way this works, if you haven't joined us on the live stream before, Adrian is safe no matter what he does. If he gets them all wrong, I'm paying $5 per wrong answer to a charity of my choice. If he gets them all right, I'll talk about this. If he gets them all right, I'll pay $25 to a charity of his choice. If he gets half and half, I'll pay them. Here's the way it goes down. Whatever he gets more of, right or wrong, I'm going to pay $5 for that. So if you get 3 wrong, $15. All right, let me follow this. Here we go. All punk rock questions, none of which I think are unfair. mean,
Okay.
I did. I had James Godkins on, and I asked him the hardest possible rock star questions I could, and but I'm being nice to you, I think.
Oh, thank you.
Let's start here. Paul Cook and Steve Jones were members of which 70s punk band? I'll give you the options: Ramones, Sex Pistols, The Clash, or Stiff Little Fingers.
Steve, what was it? The two names again?
Paul Cook and Steve Jones.
That would be the Pistols, I think.
Ooh, The Clash, I think.
Oh, crumbs.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I checked all these before, but you're the expert. So I'm starting to get a little freaked on this. All right, here we go. Who replaced Tommy Ramone as the drummer for the Ramones in '78? C.J. Ramone, Richie Ramone, D. Dave Ramone, or Marky Ramone?
D. Dave Ramone?
Marky Ramone. Right now, I'm leaning toward, you're gonna have to really pull this out, or I'm gonna have to pay on the get them all wrong side. All right, here we go. Which album by The Clash featured the song English Civil War? I'm trying to throw these at your country. The options were The Clash, Give 'Em Enough Rope, London Calling, or Combat Rock. Which album by The Clash?
I'm thinking London Calling.
Thank God. All right, you broke the streak. All right. Now, two more, right? Yeah, two more. Which of these Dead Kennedys albums was released after the band split up? And I'll give you a hint. It's related to CX. The albums were Frankenchrist. Don't really see the CX connection there, but maybe you will. Fresh Fruit for Rotting Vegetables. There's a possibility. Plastic Surgery Disasters. That's also a possible CX one. Or Give Me Convenience or Give Me Death.
Well, it's the latter, of course.
There you go. Give Me Convenience or Give Me Death. I must say,
big shout out to Fresh Fruit and Rotting Vegetables, because that's a tremendous, tremendous album.
I will have to go back and re-listen to it. Last question. This will be the one that either puts you over the top and I'm paying for the right answers, or puts you under the top. We'll call it that way. And I'm paying for the wrong answers. So either way, it's $15 for me. Here we go. Captain Sensible is more commonly associated with which British punk rock band? Sham 69, The Damned, UK Subs, or The
Damned.
All right, I'll leave you with that one. I'll give you that one. That was a tough call.
He actually lives in this town that I live in.
Wow, I shouldn't even given you the question. All right, finally, I'm going to give you. I'm going to leave these two questions for the audience. They can weigh in them on the show now if you want. If you get a first right answer to either of these questions, then I will send you out a copy of my books. I just heard from Adrian he was going to match. So I'll send him a copy of Punk CX XL rather, thanks to Adrian as well. So here are the two questions for the audience related to punk rock. Punk rock has strong roots in three musical traditions. Name any of them. Any of the three musical traditions. I think Adrian kind of gave a little of a hint earlier. And then the second question for a copy of one of my books and a copy of Punk XL is, what were the two ingredients essential to achieve the spiky hair look of many punk rockers? All right, the two must-have ingredients. Enough of that. Back to the topic of the customer experience element of your punk world. All right, Punk XL is a step up, and it relies on friends of yours who've added to the dialogue and conversation. Mm-hmm. It also is focused on leadership. So let's talk about, it's one thing to think about CX from a more passionate, stripped down, emotive version. It's another thing to lead a CX initiative. So take me for the next 5 or so minutes down a pathway of how do you actually get to deliver a punky CX experience if you're a leader of an organization.
So this one was an invite to do better work, different thinkings, to challenge norms and things. Now that was published in 2019, and then it sort of came into its own in 2020 when the pandemic hit and everybody was forced to switch to digital, get back to basics, all that type of stuff. But over the course of the last sort of 18 months, 2 years or so, I've just sort of been watching all these different things that have been going on. And it struck me, and that it's no longer sufficient to talk about just customer experience. There's like a holistic dimension to this, because your employee experience is connected to your customer experience. Your stakeholder experience, i.e., the impact you have on the world around you, is influences your customer's experience, but also the kind of the experience that leaders have in operating these companies or guiding these companies is really important. So it struck me that we almost need to go beyond just thinking about customer experience and think about things more holistically. And that's why we put together this thing, Punk Excel, because Excel stands for experience leadership. Now, it's not just about experience in terms of the individual leader. It's about a higher level that includes the individual, because it's like we talk about brand leadership, we talk about technological leadership, we talk about market leadership, but we don't talk about experience leadership and what that means. And so the book is an exploration about what that means at different levels. So it looks at the individual level, it looks at sort of, what sort of team you have and your employee experience. It looks at the organization level about how you operate, how you do things, how you structure things. It looks at the customer level, and then it goes beyond that and looks at and considers and asks you to consider what is your impact on the world, as it were, around you. So to try to paint this kind of holistic sort of picture. Now, there is no answer to this, because the book is firmly almost like musing on, I think we need to start talking about this, recognize that this is a thing, and start that conversation.
Well, I've given this book away to a couple of colleagues, most of whom have taken on roles like chief experience officer or director of customer experience, and they had come from ops or they've come from marketing, and they're looking at me like, where do I start? Like, right. I don't even know how to think about the significance of what seems to be in front of me. And it gets to that other thing that I often say is everything is customer experience, right? I mean, what isn't? So how do I get a territory that's manageable and navigable in an organization?
Yeah. And so I think it's a good starter, because it'll make you think about things that you might not have thought about before, about what sort of person you need to be to lead the organization or to lead your team to create the experience that your employees need to have, or you want your employees to have, that will then facilitate the experience that your customers can have. How do you set them up? How do you kind of like go and find things out? How do you solve problems? How do you make sure that your experience is inclusive and covers, and you can see it from different perspectives?
I love the diversity components. I think it's becoming far more relevant now. Not only diversity from a standpoint of diverse customer segments, but really having a diverse team to meet the diverse needs of your customers. It's really becoming, I think, much more top of mind in the way we think about customer experience.
And it's actually what's fascinating. Somebody asked me that most of the I've got 12 collaborators from people from all around the world. I mean, it could be they are their own sort of like thought leaders in their own sort of space. They run they've founded and run a community of businesses. There's a chief customer officer of a major mobile telecoms company, to the chief marketing officer of a massive technology company. So the contributors are diverse. But also what's really interesting, which I'm really proud of, is that of the 12, the majority of the 12 contributors, people I've collaborated with, are women. And I wanted to really promote sort of female voices and female perspectives. And because the experience space is dominated by people like you and I wanted to open up the floor to give that perspective, because I get to learn in the process, and it's been fabulous working with my band.
Playing your hits. It's interesting, because I think CX is a lot about an emotive side to understanding, right? about building connections with customers that are emotional. Obviously, there's tactical elements of that. We have to make sure we make all the cognitive thoughts about a brand relevant as well. But it is intriguing to think how male-dominated some of the consultative firms have been in a space that has a lot of emotionality to it, when men are not as traditionally thought of as having the depth of emotional understanding. And again, there's exceptions to all of these stereotypes, but I do think it's wonderful that we're just seeing a rounding out of some of those wrongs of the way the field was done. I think I like the book. I wrote of this in the endorsement, my endorsement. I said, "Whoa, mind blown!" Like that's the way I always talk right there. Punk XL is non-conformingly brilliant. Strap in for a wild and transformative ride, and say goodbye to your conventional customer experience mindset. I actually think I got that one right. Sometimes
there you go.
underwhelmed.
I mean, I wanted to just, which will give you the I guess, people a flavor of what this is about. I know we talked about it slightly before. There's a part in the book, and it is a quote from Woody Guthrie. And it's Woody Guthrie was asked a question about what the role of folk music was in protest. And he said, the role of folk music in protest is to disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. And I put that in the book. You can see it kind of here, because I think that equally applies to people in the sort of experience sort of space. Now, here's the kind of the question. Are you the disturbed or are you the comfortable? And you have to understand where you're at, because actually we need difference. We need people to want to do different things if we want different results. And so this book will not be comfortable reading for many people, but in it is a challenge to step up and do better and be better, because the world needs us. The world needs all of us. And our customers are waiting.
Well, and I think there are two things to Woody Guthrie's commentary, right? And one that you've highlighted in the context of your book. And for me, one is that we need to fix the pain points in broken customer experiences, which is that comfort the disturbed, if you will, at some level. And I think we also have to not think inside of a box of just iterating the same old customer experience over and over again, which is, I think, to disturb the comfortableness of the thing. So in the balance of that, knowing when to do each is what I think is mastery, right? One of the chess masters once said, it's not knowing the rules, it's knowing when to break them, right? The rules are easy and the strategies are predictable, but there are times when you should break them. And if you break them, you win. If you don't, you continue to play the same game. So to me, I think there's something brilliant in that. And Woody Guthrie always brings me up. I had as a guest on the show, Dickie Smothers, who I did a TED Talk with. And Dickie Smothers, one of the Smothers brothers, very irreverent television in the US in the 60s, and challenged the status quo, and had Woody on and had big scandal with Woody doing the Big Muddy or whatever it was that he sang on the show. And I think in the test of time, because that show got canceled because of its irreverence to, I think it was Lyndon Baines Johnson at the time. In the test of time, people have looked back and said, wow, that was broadcast integrity. It was people who stood up for, a message and stayed on message. And I think that there's something about this whole punk thing that forces us to look at people who were troubled and anguished a lot in Britain with the economic realities, right? That stood up and spoke out. And we all need to be thinking, are we those people or not?
Well, and it's like, it doesn't necessarily need rough times to stand up, because there's always things that need to be attended to.
But I think right now qualifies as a rough time, Adrian. I don't know about you. I think it falls in the category. We could call this a cataclysmic pivotal moment.
Well, I'm not saying normal times. I'm going to hasten to add, but like assuming the pandemic kind of recedes and we go back to some sort of stability of sorts, and everything feels like it's plain sailing. It's like going, well, actually, just because people don't speak up doesn't mean to say there's nothing to fix.
Yeah. I have 3 minutes, and I want people to know how they can get a hold of you, what you bring to the table. Obviously, your ideational space, the thought-provoking space, the different take on CX. All that's been articulated well today. But do I bring you in as a workshop facilitator? Do I bring you in as a keynoter? Do I bring you in because I'm starting to, if I'm a mid-sized company, Fortune, in the U.S., Fortune 500 company?
So I work in different kind of ways. I mean, all of the above. I mean, you can say that I kind of do. I'll run workshops. I'll do keynotes, but I also kind of work with kind of firms on an advisory basis. So I end up they have a particular problem. They set up a project team, and I end up getting not embedded as a sort of an advisor, an ongoing advisor into this project team to help kind of like figure out where they need to kind of figure out where they are, figure out what they need to go, and help them kind of steer and guide along the way. So those are sort of the three broad kind of ways that I work with people.
And in all cases, they can find you at adrianswinsco.com, as we've been broadcasting it on the bottom of this throughout the show. What's up ahead? I mean, it's the invariable question, and then I'm going to ask you for your driving tip, something we should all be thinking about on our road. But what's up ahead in your journey, and then how do you help all of us with a quick tip on how to move our journey forward if we're trying to improve the lot of the customer's experience?
So what's up ahead? Well, Crumbs, we've got a bunch of stuff in the pipeline. I'm working with some really, really nice kind of like brands. I mean, I get choked up. Some of the people I get to work with and some of the work I get to do. I'm very privileged. I get to do work that I like with people that I really like, which is a complete honor. Last year feels like it's just gone, and I've written the book, and now we're going to start to just like talk about it a little bit more. So, and I think we might be moving this year, so I think we're not going to plan any kind of big new kind of projects. So it's more of a case of like more of the same. And just kind of develop and explore and research some of the kind of themes and concepts that I've been kind of thinking about over the last kind of like 6 months or so. But in terms of the tip, the thing I would like people to do is, on the assumption that many of your listeners rather, and your viewers are going to be in managerial, supervisory, leadership sort of positions, let's say, I would say to them, go and find the person that is the one person or a person that is serving your customers day in and day out. They might be kind of like, I don't know, that you just don't met, and just go and ask them, how was your day? And what can I do to make your life easier? Wow.
Yeah, really. I mean, all those people who really are carrying the water on customer experience, it's really important to give them some water too, because often they're the last to drink, and they can tell you where to mine for gold. Truly, I think.
Yeah. The genius thing. The other thing, one final thing, is if you want some real insight about how things work, and then the disparity that exists between executive and kind of frontline, then go and watch kind of archived episodes of Undercover Boss, because it's mind blowing. And it's that stuff still exists, kind of like the disparity and kind of like understanding and in terms of what goes on in kind of companies. But it's like, it's brilliant.
Yeah, I haven't seen an episode in a long time. And I think I had a company once where the CEO was approached as to, whether he wanted to be on the Undercover Boss or not. And we were all talking about, there's some good PR here, but man, what we might uncover on television is more. We better try to work this out before they have the cameras rolling. So, yeah, hey, exactly. Adrian, it is an honor. You said mind blown. That's exactly the words I used with regard to Punk XL. I encourage you to read the book. Adrian would tell you that he's not about trying to sell books. Books are a part of his journey. In fact, the proceeds of Punk XL are being donated to charity. So God bless him, and thank him for all he's done, for his time today on the show. Please visit him at adrianswinsco.com. We'll be sending copies of the book to the people who answer our trivia questions, which, again, just quickly, tell me punk rock has strong roots in 3 musical traditions. Give me any one of them. First one, give me an accurate one. It's going to get a copy of one of my books as well as Punk XL. And the second question is, what were the 2 ingredients essential to achieve the spiky hair look that many punk rockers had? please just answer that question. The first one with the right answer will receive a copy of that book. And again, thank you. We heard from Muhammad, who said that was a wonderful XL discussion. I do deeply appreciate that, Muhammad. And for all of you who are watching now, I'm grateful for the time. If you find value in this and you know somebody who is trying to punk up their CX and increase their leadership of CX in ways that disrupt the status quo, but comfort those who have had too much disruption, maybe let's bring them to this podcast so they can benefit from the wisdom of Adrian. We're doing this once a month, we say, though I have so many guests lined up that I'm going to try to do it a little more frequently than that, maybe every couple of weeks. We were on a cadence of doing it every week. It was just crazy. Lots of time involved in lining up guests and getting it done. So we're not probably going to be able to keep the once a week schedule that we had done once a long time ago, but we are shooting for at least once a month, and certainly maybe as much as twice per month if we can pull that off. So thank you for your viewership today. May you go out and change the world as we drive along in the CX bus to take you to locations that are hopefully both informative and locations that hopefully are fun as well.